Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the public and anyone watching on television. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Malvagnam and Councillor Morley, and Councillor Rise is substituting for Councillor Malvagnam.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, to confirm and sign the non-exempt minutes of the meeting held on Monday, the 25th of July. Has anyone any comments to make about these minutes? We've all had a copy. No? Okay. Then I will sign these. Thank you. Next, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in any of the issues we're discussing on the agenda this evening? No? Excellent. In which case, item number 4, statement of accounts. I think this is Mr. Watson.
Thank you very much, Chair. What you have here at item 4 is an update on the audit of the financial statements for the 2019-2020 financial year. The report contains basically all the information that is needed, I hope, but I'm just saying to confirm I have spoken with the external auditors this afternoon, and I've spoken with my team of accountants who are working on the accounts, and we are closing in. I tried to push the auditor for a commitment, but he would already confirm that once all the questions have been addressed, he will be able to give an opinion on the accounts. So that's where we are. I am still pushing him, so I would like to see these accounts signed off within this financial year. That's my target. And financial year, yes. One calendar year won't be possible, unfortunately, unless you want to come in on Christmas Day, Chair. But just to warn you off that if I get the audit report in my sticky mitts, I will look to try and set up a special meeting of this council, if you're all able to attend, sometime towards the end of January. I'm not promising anything.
Thank you, Bob. I notice in your report there are 19 outstanding issues, and these are fairly minor.
Yes, they are fairly minor, although today the current tally is at 24. It's gone down, it goes up, so it is one of those ones, I don't think anyone's ever done an audit with auditors. You whack one mole and 2 more pop up. But we are trying to keep they're becoming more and more trivial and minor in my view, and certainly nothing of materiality that would cause an issue or qualification of the accounts.
Right. Anybody else? Rodney.
I was also going to ask about these 19 or 24, whatever it might be by the end of the meeting, I don't know. But I can remember about, I think it was the end of November 2020, when we just before your time, obviously. But I think at that stage we were told there were 9. I'm pretty sure we were told we were 9. I could look it up on YouTube and see. So much as I appreciate you're doing everything you can, and I agree we should call. I don't think we should leave this to the new council. I think that would be totally unacceptable. I think we've got to do absolutely everything we can to resolve it as soon as possible. If it means January extra meeting, I wouldn't do Christmas Day, but I would agree that we do need to wrap this up. Absolutely, you know, it's nonsense really. It's that gone on as long as this, quite frankly. But I am concerned that the numbers are going in the wrong direction. Now I appreciate that it might be that these are more minor, but as I've mentioned, I've heard this before, and as has everybody else. And so I appreciate you're saying this in good faith to us, and I do accept that. But I can't sit here and say I'm confident we are going to get this done by the end of the year. You know, I do accept that we've had issues with people leaving, but that's an issue for us now. The issue at the time was those people were here and could have answered queries if the external auditor had had their resources in place. That's what it appears anyway. So this remains very unsatisfactory. It's difficult to pin blame until we actually get the audit, but as we sit here, it's really very poor. And I'm sure others would use more appropriate language than that, but that's kind of where I'm at, really. Not good.
Councillor Perry.
Not the right one. I'd just like to make the point that we all agree that this is not the way it should be, but the blame, 90% at least of the blame here is on the auditor. And the audit, it has been agreed that we would change auditors from the next year's on, so action has been taken on that front. And everything is being done to answer any queries that are outstanding. Time and again, the auditors have promised a right date and they've not delivered. And it's very difficult for us to control a massive company like BDO. So it's peculiar to us.
I kind of agree with you, but they're not a massive company. They're a private, what's it, a PPL, or LLP, Limited Liability Partnership. There's not many of them, and they're not doing the job that they're supposed to be paid for. It's the system that Mr. Pickles, in the dim and distant past, introduced in order to save money and increase efficiency. It's just total rubbish. You know, we don't have a say in who is appointed to do our audit our accounts. It used to be KPMG. They pulled out of the new system because they could see it's not going to work. They're coming back in at the next thing, but they're not going to be our auditors. Our auditors from Grant Thornton. Yeah, and I personally know nothing about them at all. But as Councillor Bates said, we've had promise after promise after promise from BDO. They're almost ready. They'll be with you before the next meeting. We've been hearing that for 3 years, and it's no nearer. You know, the same excuses, the same promises, every meeting, every phone call. It's frustrating. I'm going to be leaving this chair in May, and I think, peace, Mr. Watson, the likelihood is that I will never sign off an audit. I do not believe they're actually come up with the goods. They were going to come here this evening to talk to. What is the point of that? If you've got time to spare to come here, to sit down and finish our accounts off. It's dreadful. Sorry,
I'm sorry to extend your rant, but if I go back to the minutes of the last meeting, I was going to raise this, but I thought it would be unfair because the committee administrator has accurately recorded this. But it did say, at the current time, expected the audit report be ready in time for the committee's meeting in September. Now, this is now the end of November, and once again, it's not here. So I don't think we're going to get it, if I'm honest. I've lost confidence in them, and you know, hopefully I will be proved wrong, but I haven't been proved wrong in the last 3 years, so we'll see.
And the really worrying thing from my point of view is that these are the accounts for 1920. You know, there's 2 years' worth of accounts to be audited after that. And they're going to squeeze those in before they pass over to Grant Thornton. Well, thank you very much. I mean, if there's anything we could do, but there isn't, we would help.
If I could just say, they have actually secured extra resource, which is, I think, a positive step for them. But I feel if that resource disappears, we will be, as you say, almost at the point of giving in, but I won't give in. I will get there. They won't beat me.
Well, I hope that Rodney or I are proved wrong and you're proved right, but I'm not betting my house on it. Thank you. Moving on, as they say in Dibley, the monitoring officer's annual report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. I hope you're well. So the report you have at agenda item 5 is the monitoring officer's annual report, and it's an opportunity for the monitoring officer to set out to the committee in general at a high level the standards issues that the monitoring officer has dealt with over the year, and by the year I mean November to November. So for this year it's a slightly more lengthy report than the last report I did in November. I've tried to keep it as short as possible, but some of the documents that needed to be appended to the report are lengthy, but they are required to make sense of the content of the report. So if I could just start quickly with section 2, and that section is titled Key Issues and Matters. The first section just points to some code of conduct training that I delivered to the planning committee, and essentially that training was around the limits of freedom of speech as councillors. The feedback I got was that the training was well received, so I hope that was indeed the case. Just to let you know that we are developing a new members induction programme for May 23, and a focus of that training will be, a focus of that induction will be training on the code of conduct, and we have an agenda to provide a members fair where members will be able to meet officers as part of the welcome day. Section 2.3 just highlights to you that the annual governance statement was reworked this year to include information from service departments on some of the weaknesses in the service areas. That's a new format for this year, and that annual governance statement has already been to the committee, and the committee did make comments which were then taken forward into the final annual governance statement. Section 2.4 just highlights to you some potential changes that may be made to the standards regime going forwards. I don't have any dates on when these changes may come into effect. They are paragraph 2.4 sets out the government's response to the Committee for Standards in Public Life's 2019 report, which had 26 recommendations on changing and improving the standards regime in local government. But the two that I think are probably most important to highlight are potential changes to strengthen the standards regime around behaviour that doesn't necessarily amount to criminal behaviour but could be serious incidents of bullying. So they are looking to strengthen the standards regime around that particular type of behaviour, and also to increase the protections for statutory officers. Those are the key ones, I think, to bring out. Like I said, there's no time scale on that, so we just don't know when those changes will come into effect. Section 3 just highlights to the committee the value of waivers that have been approved since November last year. It's a requirement for the monitoring officer to report to the committee on the value of waivers, hence why this section appears in the report. And you can see there that the total value of waivers approved over the year is £583,670, and I've provided a breakdown of the value by service area in the table in 3.1. In terms of points to note, I would comment that 232,000 of that total was attributable to legal services, so that's quite a significant sum. It's not an amount that I would expect to see year on year. I think that's an exceptional amount given that 150,000 relates to the local plan, which is very much a one-off expenditure. Section 4 just gives you some brief details of the number of complaints that the monitoring officer and the deputy monitoring officer have dealt with over the year. There were a total of 16 complaints, which is, I would say, significantly down from the previous year, which hopefully is it is a good thing. I don't have reasons for why that's the case. I can only comment that the number of complaints are down, and the majority have been dealt with informally or dismissed as not having any merit. You will note that Appendix B contains an investigation report in respect of one complaint that did progress to an investigation. So that report is there and has been published as part of the paper. And as far as I'm concerned at the moment, part of that complaint relating to Councillor Vaughan is still ongoing. In relation to Jane Clark, that complaint has been resolved in that an apology has been provided. So overall, at the moment, I don't see that there's any reason that a hearing of a subcommittee is needed, but that depends on the outcome of the investigation with Malcolm Vaughan, formerly Councillor Vaughan. So those are the points that I wanted to highlight to you as part of my annual standards report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for Councillor Rise?
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding just reading the investigation regarding the Bisley Parish Council, one thing that I noted was that obviously it was identified that there was no bullying policy or grievance policy, and there was one, and I realised this is not really a question about Bisley Parish Council, but it's more about the parish councils in general. Has a review been undertaken to ascertain whether all the parish councils within the borough have adequate policies in place to deal with this in case of a situation arises?
Apologies, Chair, I didn't have my microphone on. The short answer is no. Parish councils are independent statutory bodies, and we wouldn't have a role to undertake that kind of function. It's possible if all the parish councils got together and requested that we undertake an exercise like that. So it's possible, but it's not something we would do of our own volition.
You have a comeback?
Yes. So I guess as the authority that is therefore responsible for standards within the borough, obviously we're the authority that have done this investigation. What powers do we have to ensure that standards are being maintained within the parish councils? Otherwise, we could end up in a situation where the parish councils are not upholding the standards as we as the responsible authority would expect them to. To reword my original question, would we be able to ask the parish councils if they have those policies in place? Essentially, it's a request, not necessarily force them to, but it's just a request to make sure that we don't have this situation moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Rise. We can certainly inquire. There's no reason why we can't do that. But just for the committee's information, because the parishes are independent statutory bodies, they can have their own code of conduct. And our only role is to enforce that code should there be any complaints. They can adopt the borough's code of conduct, that's a matter for them, but they are free to have their own code. But we can certainly inquire, there's no problem with that.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Chairman. On the section on waivers, I noticed 232,000 attributable legal services, but legal services don't appear in the table. So about 150 of that is relating to the local plan, so therefore one assumes, can one read that 29,000 of that sum is relating to planning, whereas the rest of the 72,000 legal services, I was going to say buried, where is it attributed to? As the table doesn't show legal services as an entity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. I can confirm that the remaining expenditure was in the Investment and Development Department to support London Road project. Please.
can I just come back? Would it be helpful to include legal services in future as a spend item department? Thank you.
Thank you. It seems like a good idea. Anybody else? Councillor Bates and Councillor Perry after that.
Thank you. I'm going to take the item first on the investigation, if that's okay. And just for those who are watching online, although I do know it's a very important football match going on, so I'm not sure how many of those there will be, but we do have several representatives of Bisley Parish Council here tonight in the public gallery who are particularly interested in this item. So I think it's obviously important we just recognise that. I'm pleased that Councillor Rice raised about the grievance policy, because I think that's obviously something I would agree that we could encourage the parish council about, because that does help to nip these sorts of issues in the bud at the earliest possible stage. I've dealt with bullying cases as a former union rep, both people alleging it and also people who claiming to be victims of that, and it's immensely upsetting all round. And the earlier that we can have definitions and clarity and boundaries and all that sort of thing, the better. So I would actively encourage that. I would also highlight point 6 regarding appraisals, reviewing of job descriptions, training and development, and one-to-ones. And again, I think, as Councillor Rice rightly mentioned, is that if that's something that we could encourage all parish councils, it's not our role to tell them, but as any good employer, that's something that we should be doing. I mean, we do appraisals for our staff, or I think we do, or pretty sure most people have them. Reviewing and updating job descriptions. These are things that we would do ourselves. And I know that there wouldn't be a HR department, but nonetheless, these are things that any good employer should look to be looking at, if they're not already aware. So particularly for small organisations. So I would actively encourage that as well. I note that Councillor Vaughan has not apologised at this stage for behaviour that appears to be of concern, although I note that you said there's an investigation still ongoing, I believe. Is Councillor Vaughan still a councillor, by the way? I wasn't sure. He's not. Okay, so that's obviously going to be quite tricky to get any kind of apology as a result of that, and I think it's just worth bearing that in mind. The point I also wanted to highlight was about the waivers, because this struck me as quite a lot of money, if I'm honest with you, £565,000. Although I do see that it is agreed by the monitoring officer and Section 151 officer, and on the grounds of urgency, or that it is in the best interest of the council to appoint a particular contractor. Now, I have absolutely no doubt about the integrity of the monitoring officer and Section 151 officer, but you can see that that could be, if they were less honourable people, abused, if I'm honest with you, because you know, we've got two people here who would sign things off, and it is in the best interest of the council to appoint a particular contractor rather than doing any kind of, well, I'm not quite sure what arrangements would be done in place. I think it might be helpful to understand that, because my concern is if we're giving contracts worth tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of pounds without going through the usual processes, that does have risks, if I'm blunt about it, even with the greatest of integrity of officers that we're talking about. So that is a lot of money, I think, that are not going through the system that we would usually have. So I would ask, I suppose, what are the processes in place instead, other than just two people checking and signing it off? Or is that it?
Thank you. Councillor Perry, and then we'll go sum up.
Just back to what Councillor Rice was saying about this code of conduct in parishes, I think we ought to be stronger than just asking if they've got one. I think we should actually be positively recommending them and quoting a couple of reasons why, because of issues that have cropped up the last couple of years. I see no reason. That's not over-obligating us. You're reporting on it anyway, so we're obviously involved in it, and that should be prompting a proper recommendation that they should have proper standards and probably an offer for help. If they needed help in constructing those, we'd be happy to help them.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor White.
With Windlesham Parish Council, we have officer member protocol, and we have councillor and employee relations policy, and we adhere to the members' code of conduct, and it comes up quite often with us, so we do deal with that. And we've got something on our agenda for next week to do with bullying, so it's something that we do look into.
Could I ask, does your parish council have a written policy or statement or code of conduct or anything?
Not actually on bullying, but we do have the officer member protocol, which is usually where those problems happen. So we do have a policy on that.
Is it written?
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Councillor Bates.
I've got one other point which I was just going to make, which was I saw there were 16 complaints, of which 9 were dismissed without merit. We've obviously got one which is before us. My simple maths is that suggests that 7 had some degree of merit. And obviously we appreciate we can't go into names other than the example you've given. But are any of these repeat people, i.e. the same person with more than one valid complaint?
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Yes, there are some individuals with more than one complaint. That is the case, but I can't give any names. But those complaints were able to be resolved.
Okay, so in regard to, and I appreciate you can't give the names, that's fine, but in respect of the individuals for whom there has been more than one complaint against them which has some degree of merit, because that's the ones that we're concerned about, do those individuals receive retraining, any degree of warning, or these are obviously not so serious that they have to be reported here, but this is demonstrating a pattern of behaviour potentially that we just need to be aware of. So I suppose what remedial action is for that in terms of support or discipline or whatever it might be?
Thank you, Councillor Bates. I just want to make sure that I don't want to say the wrong thing. So without being able to look at the data again and have the names before me, it could be that there are a mix of complaints that were dismissed without merit and complaints that had merit for the same person. So they may not all fall into one category. I just don't have that information in front of me. In terms of what we could do as a borough council, under the law, we can only make recommendations to parish councils. We can't require the parish councils to do anything. We make recommendations on what we think the appropriate resolution would be. We will always try to provide guidance and offer help to individuals or the council as a whole if that's what they would like us to do. We will positively offer that. But we don't have any enforcement powers in that strict sense. The furthest we can go is make recommendations and hope that the parish council receives those positively.
Sorry, but some of these are borough councils. Sorry, are we on now? Sorry, okay, apologies. So, yeah, half of the complaints were against borough councillors, though. So, now we don't know how many of those had merit or didn't have merit. My concern is where if there is a repeat of particularly borough councillors, I don't know if there is or there isn't, and obviously you may not have that information to hand, but it doesn't matter so much now, I suppose, coming up towards the end of a term, unless that person restands. But that's the concern I have, I suppose, of people repeatedly doing minor things. We might make mistakes. If they're making repeated mistakes like this, that's the problem, I think. That's what I'm most concerned about.
Thank you. Something that occurs to me is if we had a toolkit of appropriate policies that we could send out to all the parish councils, just with this is kind of what we consider to be best practice, would you consider working to these? You know, this is not forcing, it's here is some help. Would that help?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can certainly look at that and maybe perhaps liaise with the clerks of the parish councils to see if they would like that level of support.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And on the question of the waivers, yes, it is a large amount of money. Certainly, it looks like a large amount of money to me, but how do these figures compare with the budgets of those particular departments is a question that I would ask. In terms of, I mean, £82,000 for IT, what's the IT budget? You know, is that most of it, or is that a tiny fraction? Councillor Hawkins.
Chairman, could I just come in? Yeah, that's a fair point, but it's also how many individual cases make up the total. It could be 40 at £50 or whatever. So I think that's another element that's possibly missing here. Obviously, I know the local plan and on the property investment side, you know, there are a number of cases that make that up because of our involvement in the committee process on that. But that is another element we might like to think of in future to say it's a bit like the, you know, the reporting case. It's just how many different instances have made up the whole, if I got that right.
Yes, I think that's perfectly. The whole thing just needs more expansion so that we can understand where these numbers come from. And don't get me wrong, personally, and I speak just as an individual, I think sometimes it's much more cost effective. Say, well, we need some help. These people can help get it done. You know, rather than go through a whole rigmarole, which takes time and everything else. So I'm not against the idea. It's just it needs more clarity. Yeah.
Okay.
I am, because I suppose, yeah, I just think that opens up the risk to us. Now, as I say, most of the time that would be absolutely fine, no issue at all. There will be the odd occasion that we may be aware of in this council where maybe things haven't necessarily been as good as they could have been. I mean, I don't know about the local plan one. The local is obviously the biggest one. Why have we spent £150,000 on that? I mean, we knew we were going to have a local plan, so it can't be urgency. So the best interest of the council to appoint a particular contractor. Why? I mean, I'm not on planning, so I'd be interested to know.
Councillor Hawkins.
I may be able to help a little bit on that. It's because there have been staff changes and the plan has progressed to such a stage where we have timescales, we have targets where we have to meet, is my understanding. I mean, obviously, I'm not the portfolio holder dealing with this. I'm only a member of the local plan working group. But my understanding is that certainly the scope has been increasing as we go along because of government legislation and everything else that's brought in and been a change of staff. And we have got to a critical stage where the local plan has got to go. Are you on the local plan? Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but I mean, we've got to publish this very shortly and it has to come to council. And there are critical stages where it has got to be done. The work has got to be done. And it's immensely technical. And it's not something that can be picked up. We need a specialist. And specialists don't come cheap, as they say in finer circles. And I mean, that's one of the reasons. And I'm sure there are other reasons which the head of planning would be able to provide. But that's my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Rant.
Thank you, Chair. And just to expand on the amount spent on legal fees, the £150,000 figure. So my recollection is that was for a barrister for counsel. Now that's the approved spend. I don't know whether it would actually reach that limit, but that's the amount of money that is expected to cost the council for legal services to take us to the delivery of the local plan. And if I recall that the reasons for that particular barrister was the specialism that that barrister holds and the understanding that the barrister has with our particular requirements and our particular local plan was deemed to be pertinent and appropriate given the timescales that we need to get the local plan done, and also to accommodate a procurement exercise, given the timescales, is also very difficult and challenging. But it was predominantly around the level of skill that that barrister has. to assist us with the local plan.
Mr Watson.
Yes, thank you, Chair, Committee. As one of the officers who has the decisions around the waivers, it might be a bit of unclarity around how we do them and why we do them. So we have local procurement regulations that the council sets. For example, if it's under £5,000, we can have a single tender approach and just purchase the goods or services. Between 5,000 and 50,000, we will go out and get 3 tenders, generally. And over 50,000, we go into a procurement process. And it's the waivers around those processes that we put the waivers on. So in some cases, you might find that, for example, the finance system is provided by Civica. If we need to do an enhancement to it or a change to it, we can't go out and get 3 tenders because only one person deals with Civica, and that's Civica. But we still have to put a waiver in to make sure we're transparent and following the council procurement regulations. Sometimes there's only 2 people in the market in terms of tendering. So when we looked at in the finance case for treasury advisors, you have Arling Close, you have Link Asset Services. There's nobody else that provides local treasury advice for local authorities. So again, we didn't get 3 tenders. We had to put a waiver in to say this is why we've done it. And as Mr. Memberhal said, sometimes continuity of expertise in the council. So someone who has been providing a service to us and we go on again to use them rather than get somebody coming in new and having to start from scratch, learning the council's history and the knowledge of the subject and the area they're working on. We will go out and say we'll continue to use the same provider for those goods and services. Again, it's outside of our procurement regulations that are local, but what they are is a waiver to say that we've done that. So it actually, in my view, adds more transparency and test on everything else. So no one can go and procure something outside of our local regulations without either myself and Mr. Ramdahal signing off that waiver.
Thank you. As these procedures are in existence, would it be possible to append them with the minutes so that members of the committee can see exactly what is taken into account and ease any potential concerns that people might have?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we can append the procedure and the criteria for approving waivers to the minutes. Yeah.
Is that Thank you very much. No more questions? No? Alex, I think you're up.
I've got both red lights. Is that good?
You get a prize.
I guess that's fine. I'm being recorded. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So members will remember that I think at the previous Audit and Standards Committee, it was requested that I present at a forthcoming committee the current status of internal audit recommendations. So that's what I'm presenting here. The actual appendix to the main body of the report is quite lengthy, so hopefully for those members that are reading it on paper form, it will come out okay. Chair, if I could just give the headline piece of information about the report. So essentially, this is a report that shows all internal audit recommendations that have been agreed since April 2021 until about the summer of 2022. The reason I haven't included any more recently than that is essentially because most of those recommendations, unless they're absolutely urgent, we will give the service a few months to make sure that they can fully implement those. So there's no point including those more recently because most of the services won't have had the chance to action those properly. In terms of other headlines, there were 18 essential recommendations. Now, I know it's one thing that members were focused upon, not all the recommendations of the last meeting. It was more in terms of the essential recommendations. So those ones that were the hardest hitting to the council, they form the highest risk. That could be due to financial risk, it could be reputational risk, whatever those may be. In a nutshell, all of those have been actioned, I found out, with the services except one. So if I could bring that to members' attention. So that one is the information governance essential recommendation relating to making sure the council fully complies with INSPIRE regulations. So these are regulations that relate in a way to freedom of information requests. So they form part of FOI regulations, but they focus on a specific technical area, which is geographical spatial data. So it's essentially falls down to the ICT team to make sure those INSPIRE regulations have been actioned. Now, one of the things that stopped the council doing that is a member of staff has moved on. So we are missing a technical bod, in another word, whose role would have been to work with the ICT team to make sure that we're moving forward with the INSPIRE regulations, but they're still looking to recruit that individual. So I think, you know, we've hit a barrier there in terms of the ICT team not having the resources to action that. I've done what I can from an internal audit point of view. I've worked with the service. I tried to get an understanding as to what the issues are at stake. And at the end of the day, the burden is with the service to make sure that recommendation has been actioned. I can't really do anything else on that. The other recommendations are all either desirable or best practice. I think at the time of writing this report, which went to CMT 3 or 4 weeks ago, there were 18 outstanding desirable recommendations. So just to flag up a couple of those for your information, there are 2 or 3 relating to information governance. For example, there was one where the council is required to produce assets inventories for each service, which highlights all the documents, the key documents that asset actually retains, and we have to work with data protection to make sure we're complying with data protection rules in terms of how long we can hold those for, the purposes of holding them. And as at writing this report, there was one outstanding, which is revs and bends. So it's quite a critical area of the council, and it's something that the information governance manager is still trying to work with revs and bends to make sure that's in place. So that's one example. There's a few outstanding on parking. So there are a number of issues when I did the parking audit a few months ago where the service has to work more closely with the service providers in terms of what products can be provided, and some of those are still outstanding. So again, I've had several discussions with the parking manager to try and establish what the barriers are as to why those actions actually haven't been progressed as much as I would have liked. And again, those responses have been added to the schedule for members' review. There's a few areas on fraud. One of them, for example, was making sure that the council rolls out a proper e-learning package for fraud. I think fraud's quite an important area at the moment. It's happening throughout, you know, the country in terms of all sorts of organisations. And I think no matter what role people hold within the organisation, they've got to have some basic awareness of fraud principles. The good news is we've actually worked with another local council, I think it's Waverley, and there's an e-package that I tested in the last few weeks, and we're hoping to roll that forward with all staff to make sure that all staff are familiar with fraud principles, just like data protection and security. That's a mandatory course, so I'm hoping going forward fraud could be similar to that. There are a couple of outstanding issues with housing, and I've worked with Clive Jim, the housing manager, to move those forward. Again, the updates are in the report on the penultimate column. So I think those are really the headlines, Chairman, but I'm happy to take any questions that members have.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions? Councillor Bates.
Yeah, just a few. I've got down on information governance was one of the ones where we haven't done it as yet. It's a desirable one. and there's a comment about that quarterly meetings haven't taken place with, I'm not sure who those people are, but they're named initialed officers, due to timings and lack of engagement. And that struck me as a slightly concerning turn of phrase. Hopefully there isn't a lack of engagement in the council in terms of arranging officer meetings with each other, but have those quarterly meetings started yet? This is in relation to halfway down on page 32, risk register.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Specifically, which row number are you referring to?
So I'm looking at the one which is 7 from the bottom. Says, confirm this is a risk on the IS risk register, which is reviewed by myself and ICT. I'm still to have a quarterly meeting with the Zero and Depot.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's the one in terms of the Revs and Bens outstanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm more interested in the meetings, whether these meetings have taken place.
All right. To be honest with you, Councillor, I don't know if any recent meetings have taken place. I'm more than happy to go away and find out, Chair, and report back to yourself or members as appropriate on that one.
I don't need to know the date of the meeting. It's
Yep.
just more if the
Have they
concern
taken
has been
place?
raised about quarterly meetings, and it kind of goes back to this audit thing again. And if those meetings are taking place, you know, it's not for us to micromanage that. That's really for officers. But there's obviously been an identified need there, and we just need to make sure that that's happening. I'm comfortable that's done through senior officers and just let the chair know. I don't need to know. I'm just always concerned if I see internal meetings are not happening for some reason. That's a bit of a concern. Can I also raise about parking, where we've got down that for some reason there was not a report generated. This is halfway down on page 33. There was no new park report. I'm guessing that's the cash parking scheme or just the accounting thing.
Yeah.
Reported, generated on the 21st of December 2021. Now that does concern me because that's a few days before Christmas, on the day which I would imagine is quite a good day for parking as a result of just being a few days before Christmas. That would probably be more money than would usually be the case, I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know for sure. Well, I know we had a few issues, but did we ever get to the bottom of what happened with that particular day?
To be honest, I can't remember the exact review of events, but what I would say is the new park report is a supplementary piece of control that the parking team use to verify and collaborate the income that's being received within the parking machines. So the primary level of control would be the audit tickets. So the machines themselves should actually be generating the audit tickets. What we do as part of our audit testing is to check that those additional supporting controls are there to back up the audit tickets should the audit tickets not be available, say because they're a manual process, so should the machine not be able to generate those for whatever reason, the paper gets stuck in the machine or it runs out of, you know, paper, which is highly unusual, but it is possible. But I suppose my point is there isn't just one form of control that the parking service would actually be relying. What we were surprised to find was that those additional controls on that particular day weren't available to back up the audit ticket. So I would have satisfied myself that the primary controls would have been there. Wouldn't have stopped there if the audit tickets and the reports, computer system reports, weren't available. So it is those two controls should be working in tandem to give the assurance that the parking manager needs to make sure that the income is being properly accounted for. And what I didn't find on that particular occurrence was that that secondary level of control was in place, and that's what the service used. That's what the team used to back up their audit tickets, essentially.
Thank you. I mean, I'm glad that you highlighted that, because that is actually hundreds or potentially thousands of pounds worth of council income on that day. Now, I don't know if you just randomly picked that day, whether you checked other days and they were fine, it just happened to be that day which wasn't, or whether you picked one day and unfortunately you found what you did. But that is an important issue. Now, as I say, hopefully everything's all in hand and that's fine. But that does again potentially have a risk to us as a council. So I'm glad that you picked that up. And then the final point I just wanted to flag up was about, this is on fraud on page 34, where there seems to be a dispute as to who's going to send reminders around the council on anti-fraud and corporate policies. So I'm looking at, again, 7 from the bottom, which has currently not been done. And HR seems to suggest it should be done by the MOS one or the Section 151 officer. It's not for us to say who should send an email around the council, but it's the sort of thing that doesn't look great on a report, that there seems to be a dispute as to who's going to send an email. I mean, I'll write the email if it's helpful to just send it round, but it doesn't matter who, as long as someone does it. So I guess if that could just be flagged up by, it's been helpfully put on here, but that's, again, we've got senior officers here. If somebody could just take responsibility, whether it's telling Julie or whoever it is, just somebody write it, that shouldn't involve lots of people having a conversation just to do an email, in my opinion, anyway.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bates. I will take responsibility for making sure fraud or fraud awareness is published in the council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 34, I mean, some of the ones on the car parking, I understand what's been said there, but on page 34, in respect of the fraud, and my reading of this is that there seems to be a gap in the declaration of entertainment and interests and the carrying out trial on e-learning on the fraud module, because earlier on there was mention about the gifts and just somehow it seems to be that it's there's an electronic register has been produced, but it on item on the HR carrying out trial run of e-learning fraud training module, views rating all staff. Well, all staff should be involved in that, and it does look as if it's they've tested the software, but it never showed it had been done, and e-learning is available. And that is the 5th item down on page 34. Actually, the 6th, I think it is. It just seems to be as if there's a bit of a gap here on some of this training on fraud. Thank you.
Thank you.
If it would assist, in terms of the e-learning on fraud, I think at the time the module was presented to us, we thought it was okay. However, it had a number of flaws which we felt were relevant enough not to roll it out across the board. Just to cite one example, there were a number of elements that related probably more to the private sector than to local councils, and I felt that if staff are going to commit and engage to this piece of work, it needs to be really relevant to what staff within local councils do and not what the private sector does. And that was one example of a bugbear of mine. So even though the content was there, it didn't really it wasn't punchy enough for me to actually have, really good relevance. So that's where there's been a bit of a gap in terms of slippage, because it's taken a while to get to the point now where I feel that the e-learning package is more relevant to staff than what it was when we did the specific audit.
Thank you. So it will now be being rolled out?
That's the idea. I'm working with Sarah Bainbridge and HR with the aim of rolling it out. Obviously, I'm partly in their hands in terms of timescale because I can't enforce that. And obviously, there's going to be a good time to roll that out, because obviously there's a number of training courses that run throughout the year. So it's got to fit in with all the rest of the training courses as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hawkins, is that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Perry.
Just a recommendation, really. If you're producing a schedule like this of outstanding, it would be useful to have a reference number or thing against each point, so we can know which one we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's easily done, isn't it? Anybody else? Any comments? I just have one comment on, to take your point, page 32. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The seventh, eighth one down. Anticipate 2 months to complete. I've always felt it's best to stick a date in, so it gives people a target. This is capital, written record of assets. Anticipate 2 months to complete. I just wondered, a date by which it should be complete. Yeah? Okay. Anybody else? Any issues? Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, and good night.